Hello, we're going to be talking about random numbers in this video. Not so much how they work behind the scenes because it's very, very complicated, but more how we can use these in our programs. Because the more you think about it, the more you start looking for it, so many programs use randomness in some way, often to add some variety for the user. For example, in video games, you might get loot when doing an action, and the loot might be, to a degree at least, random to add some excitement. Right now on YouTube, you've got some recommended videos. They aren't necessarily random, but if you refresh the page, you'll get a different set of recommendations because YouTube is injecting some randomness into their process to again add a bit of variety. Used all the time, and defining randomness in a very, very tight way is difficult, but we can generally say randomness refers to lack of a clear pattern. So we're getting some random values, some random numbers often, which don't have a clear pattern. So every time it runs, we get something a little bit different. There isn't a clear pattern to what we're getting. And to link this to a paper one topic, we also add randomness to encryption algorithms because we don't want there to be a clear pattern. We don't want there to be a pattern you can work backwards so that you can decrypt the ciphertext without knowing the key. In terms of what you need to know at GCSE in paper 2, you need to be able to use the random function or equivalent in your language to get random numbers. Now in OCR exam reference language, so in the examples you'll be seeing in the paper and the sort of code you could be writing if you want to, we can do this really quite simply by using, like I say, a built-in function called random. It's built in because it exists already, it's doing the work for us. This takes in two parameters. The first number is the lower range, and the second number is the upper range. This is inclusive, so this range here is between 1 and 10 inclusive. And if I just run it now, I get nothing because I have to print it. I need to be able to see what this is. So I can either print it like this, or perhaps more usefully for you in actual programs, you might want to assign it to be like a variable, maybe random num, so that you can use it later on. For now, let me just print it. Okay, now take a guess as to what we're going to see on screen. I guess we're going to get 5 here. All close, we get 6. If I run it again, we get 3, we get 9, we get 7, we get 8, we get 1. It should be random each time, and it should always be in this range. And if we keep going, we should eventually get, there we go, we should eventually get a number on our range because the random OCR made up function is inclusive. In your language, like Python, for example, you've got to do a bit more work. You've got to import a module. You've got to use either rand_range or rand_int. It's a good example of where potentially you using OCR ERL in your answers is a little bit quicker. It's a little bit more concise, a little bit shorter. So yeah, I think if I'm being clever, even if I know Python really well, I might choose to use ERL with questions like this because it is pretty simple to do. So it's random, it shouldn't have a clear pattern. In reality, these are what we call pseudo-random numbers. They're not actually random. You need to use real life nature to actually get random values. Things like radiation decay, things like events in outer space could be considered truly random. In a computer, we use algorithms to simulate it. It means you would not use something like this for actual encryption because it has got a pattern. It's just not very obvious to the user. This is how we can get random numbers. These are all integers. If I wanted to get floats or reals, which are decimal numbers or fractional numbers, I need to just make sure my values, which are being passed in as parameters, are reals themselves. So now if I keep running it, we still get numbers in the range 1 to 10 inclusive, but now they are fractional numbers. In OCR ERL, there is no way to round these decimal places, so you wouldn't need to do that in a question. The main way you'll be examined on random is just how you can integrate it into programs. So let's ask the user how many random numbers they would like to generate, then generate this many random numbers in the range 1 to 100 inclusive. Each should be written on separate lines to a text file called random.txt. This text file needs to be created before use. Oh, a lot to unpack here. For longer, harder questions, definitely worth doing a bit of planning beforehand. So I'm going to need to create a new text file. In ERL, I need to use the new file command. Another example of where Python might be a little bit harder to do when it comes to file handling. So ERL can be simpler. So I've got to create a new file. Maybe I'll do that first just to get that out of the way. So let me just create a new file called random.txt. And then I'm going to need to ask the user how many numbers they want and then generate this many random numbers. Now, because I don't know how many the user wants, I've got no choice really to use a for loop. and inside my for loop, use the random function. Now, each of these numbers should be written on separate lines to a text file, which I've created called random.txt. So inside my for loop, I'm going to need to use a write line command. And so because that's inside my for loop, I need to make sure before my for loop, I open the file so I can actually access it. So maybe I'll do that next as my next step. Let's open this file. So let's give it a file name like file equals open. And I need to put in the file name, which is random.txt. Now I'm going to have a for loop in a second, but I need to ask the user how many numbers they'd like to generate. And now I can use a for loop. So I need to use a for loop, which is going to repeat however many times the user typed in. So let's go for I equals 0 to, and I need to use how many in this to determine how many times this for loop is going to loop. But I need to subtract 1 if I chose to start at 0. If I chose to start at 1, I could just go to how many. I'm starting at 0, I need to subtract 1 because I would get how many times in total doing it like this. Now, inside my for loop, what am I doing? Well, I need to generate a number in the range 1 to 100 inclusive, then write it to the text file. So let's get a variable called num. In hindsight, my question is a little bit vague because I've not been clear on whether it should be an integer in this range or a float in this range. Let's just, as a first question, use integers. Let's do 1, 100 in my brackets in the random function to give me a random number in the range 1 to 100 inclusive. Now, I want to write this to the file by going file dot write line. That's how OCR EOL does it. And I'm going to write num to this file, but we only ever use strings with text files. I need to make sure I cast this number to be a string before I do this, like that. And that's my for loop done. That's all I'm doing, getting numbers and then writing it. So I can use next I to end my for loop. And that's actually really it for my program. Although I need to always, with files, if I opened a file, I need to always wrap up by closing the same file. You often get a mark for that, don't forget it. Here is a longer example where we're actually going to use the random number to do something in practice. So a video game set in the Arctic has a 50% chance that it is snowing. The player also needs to be told the current temperature. This is a random value between minus 40 degrees and minus 20 degrees. The temperature can be a fractional number. Write a program that outputs either it is snowing and the temperature is X degrees, or it is not snowing and the temperature is X degrees, where X is the randomly generated temperature. Right, a lot to unpack again in this question. I'm deliberately putting a lot of stuff in these. Well, we first of all have two aspects of randomness. It's either going to snow or not. There is a 50% chance, so that is a random decision. We also need to have a random value between minus 40 and minus 20, which is going to be a real. So in terms of what I'm going to do to answer this question, that second random value of the temperature is going to get outputted no matter whether it is snowing or whether it is not snowing. It's probably worth starting by just finding that value and then figuring out how I'm going to do the 50% chance afterwards. So let's get that random value. So let's say the temperature is equal to random. And now my range is minus 40 to minus 20. So I can put that in my brackets. However, if I want to have these be fractions, I need to make sure the numbers here are reals. So I need to do 0.0, 0.0. So they're treated not as integers, but reals. And in OCR's language, this would give us random fractions. Okay, so I've kind of ticked off that point about getting that random value. Let's now think about how I'm going to do the rest of it. So how am I going to simulate a 50% chance in my program using the random function? Well, there isn't a direct way to do it. I need to be clever about how I'm going to do this. If there is a 50% chance, it's either going to be one thing or another. It's a flip of a coin, essentially. So one way to simulate this is to, for example, set a chance variable to be equal to random with the values, doesn't really matter what really, but 1 to 2, something like that. So what is that saying? Well, this is going to give me a random number, either 1 or 2. Either going to be 1 or 2. I've only got two possible values here, 1 or 2. So that is a simulation of a 50% chance. There's a 50% chance it's going to be 1 and a 50% chance is going to be 2. I could have chose 0 and 1, or 3 and 4, or 5 and 6. Doesn't matter what these numbers are, because I can use this number in an if statement to see if it was snowing or not. Because, for example, if the chance was equal to 1, let's say that is representing the fact that it is snowing. If it was equal to 2, let's say it's representing the fact that it was not snowing. This is pretty common. It's not asking for a random number directly, but I have to generate a random number to simulate this other random event, in this case, a flip of a coin. So if it is chance equals 1, let's say it's snowing. So I'm going to output it is snowing and the temperature is X degrees. Well, how am I going to integrate X degrees where X is my temperature? Well, I'm going to need to use some concatenation here. The temperature is currently a real. So let me convert it to be a string and then stick on degrees at the end with a slight space at the start. Oh, it's a very tight squeeze. There we go, just about. And then in this particular case, the chance is either going to be 1 or 2. So therefore I can just use else in this case. So if the chance is equal to 2, then we're going to do the same thing, but say it is not snowing. There we go. And then if I'm being very correct here, I'm going to do end if to wrap this up. And that's it for this program. It reads very, very complicated, but actually it's not quite as bad when you see the solution. Whether you have to pick up that you do need to still generate random numbers to be able to simulate a chance of 50%. If you were, say, simulating a chance of a third, you would need to do random 1, 3, for example. If you were simulating a 6-sided dice throw, you would do random 1, 6 to have 6 possible combinations. So we use the numbers to allow us to simulate things in real life which are potentially random.